Good morning. Thanks for that, Tom. Thanks for that introduction. Yeah, I'm kind of used to a lot of people leaving the room when a planner stands up on stage. A lot of that comes down to actually not knowing really what planning is all about. Personally, from my experience, I realised that planning is actually probably at the forefront of construction, mainly because it leads the way prior to any construction. We're usually about 2 years behind the actual construction phase, or 2.5 years. So back in 2007, our recession actually started about 2005, and we knew then that things were on the downturn. At the moment, we know that we're on a cusp of a new construction wave because we've never been busier as before. So the reason I wanted to attend today was basically to show confidence, support the Construction Summit, and show the way forward that it is important to note that we're on the cusp of a new wave. A lot of what the Minister said earlier on is what I'm going to repeat, but I'm going to take the politics out of it and basically just repeat what it actually means for practitioners and people like yourself in construction. The Minister mentioned that basically you are the coal miners, but I think our firm is like the actual picks that are hitting the coal face all the time. Bang, bang, bang. We're trying to get planning permissions through the system. We're trying to do it quicker, better. But what we're finding is it's getting harder and harder and harder, mainly due to restrictions on standards, higher requirements being implemented, and just the whole planning process is becoming more difficult. So I'm briefly going to go through the presentation this morning. And what I'm going to be looking at is same things, Construction 2020, new planning bills. But before that, I want to basically show where we've come from. 2007, as we all know, what a lot of construction people want to get back to is 2007. What happened in 2007? We had 90,000 dwelling units. We had 86,000 planning applications. We had planning resources, 607 planners working in local authorities. And we had a construction value of 38 billion euros in the economy, which employed, that's not working. Is that working? Which employed 282 workers. This wasn't sustainable.
Go ahead, keep on.
This wasn't sustainable, but it basically reflected a period in construction that will never be reflected again. And I think in 2007 it was reflected by this, which was a sign for basically a new development which was called Beautiful Living, which was actually in Coolock. And that was actually launched by Jamie Redknapp, I think, at the time. But it kind of reflected where the whole housing market was going. So, number of planning applications. The reason I want to show you these key statistics is that the number of planning applications and the number of constructions and the level of construction and the number of dwelling units are all highly correlated. The number of people working in planning authorities are highly correlated to basically the output. And it's important that if we're going to rebuild this country, we need to have these resources back in place. So that's basically the number of planning applications from 1995 to 2014. And you can see basically a peak in 2000, and then it dropped again. And this drop was the dot-com bubble. So I firmly believe that planning applications is where people believe that things are going to happen. So it's a sign of confidence. And this graph is highly correlated to the number of units constructed. And then you see it peaking again in 2005. And then it basically came off and dropped dramatically from 2006, 2007 onwards to basically what we have today, which is about we have about 20,000 applications running in the country currently. So you can see again here the peaks and the troughs in the actual units for which permission was granted. So these are the actual dwelling units constructed, or granted planning permission. And then you can see the number of dwelling units actually built over the same period, 1995 to 2014, again peaking in 2005 with over 90,000 dwelling units. I also have here graphed the number of planners working in it, because it's important. A lot of people probably go into planning authorities, and it's all about resources in planning authorities, that there's enough planning staff there to deal with the applications. I don't have a graph because there was only census done by the Irish Planning Institute 3 times. In 1995 there was less than 200 planners, there was 198. In 2005 there was 608, and that's dropped back down now to basically just over 400 planners. 1/3 of all planning staff have left local authorities in the last 4 or 5 years. So that's going to have an implication of creating this sustainable rebuilding of Ireland. I want to show also where the location of units are. And I put up these 2 slides incidentally because you can probably see they look quite similar. One is Cork and one is Dublin. One was built by Gandon and one was built by Sisks. They're remarkably kind of similar, if you agree. But in 2007, we built 22% of units of the 78,000 total in Dublin, of which 62% were apartments. In Cork, it was 11%, of which 15% apartments. Now transform that over to 2011. We have 30% of all construction in Dublin, of which 55% of apartments, and in 10% is Cork, of which only 6% are apartments. So you can see the drop in the apartment numbers and obviously the total figure of construction units. The location of planning resources is also equally important. This is basically a census taken of all the planners where they worked in 1996 and 2014. And you can actually see that there was actually 2 local authorities that employed more than 30 planners, which was Dublin City Council and Cork City Council. On that basis, the resources have massively declined. As I said, 1/3 of all planning staff have left the planning system. It's also important to note that Dublin City Council in 1996 employed more planners than they do today. So what issues do we have from the past? As the Minister mentioned, we have the Mahon Tribunal, which was 2012. We have, Brendan McDonagh said, ghost estates. There's only 900 units actually left. We have wrong policies, we have wrong products, wrong location, and basically that's resulted in planning bashing and a kind of an anti-development sentiment, which is not good if we're going to rebuild Ireland sustainably. 2014, what do we have? We have now 11,000 units under construction, 21,000 planning applications, and we have resources for 415 planners. We have a construction value of basically 11 billion, which is 7.1% of GNP. The sustainable level is around 10% of GNP, and we're employing 110 workers. So the natural balance is about 25,000 units is required, which equates to about 10% of GNP. Therefore, the sustainable level of units is 25,000 units, but it's a still very low level of planning applications coming through the country. As I said, the more planning applications come through, the more variety and options we have for basically construction. We also have a huge issue of zone land and unserviced land and where the zone land is. I think it was Colin McCarthy about a week ago wrote in the Sunday Independent that there's actually huge amounts of zone land. That's not the question. The question is there planning permissions that can actually be viably undertaken to construction level? And I want to show you why, because there's basically a thing called what I call the time bomb effect of a planning application. I think Tom actually mentioned this morning in the news. 72 weeks it takes. A planning application in this country has to start off with a pre-planning, and then it has to go through to a planning application lodge. Statutory, it takes 8 weeks, but it doesn't take 8 weeks because we have a thing called additional information requests, which adds another 6 months onto it. In 95% of planning applications, we get additional information requests. Basically then, you lodge the application back in, and you have another 4 weeks. Then, the only country in the world that has third-party appeals is Ireland. It can be brought down to a planning appeal, and in most cases, I would say about 72% of all planning applications for residential construction end up in the board on appeal. Statutorily, they have to basically turn that around in 18 weeks, but we're actually finding now that the board, they only actually have 54 planners, are actually not coping with the increase in the workload. And what's resulting is additional time lags, additional time delays. So basically, from inception of actually lodging your application, not including all the pre-bits that go on with the design team, it's taken basically 70 weeks to get planning permission. So what you're designing now might not be the right product in 70 weeks' time, because the market is rapidly changing as well. There's lower household formation rates, like everybody's building 3 and 4 bedroom semi-Ds, but the kind of the market where it's going is for higher density apartment living as well, especially in the Dublin area. Therefore, what's happened at the moment? Supply is basically less than demand. which is a housing crisis. And I just took this slide here, which you probably saw at the weekend papers, which is the rent report, which is basically the housing crisis. It's affecting the rental market. It's having huge impact. So we have a housing crisis at the moment. We have to deal with it. How are we going to deal with it? Hopefully, I'm going to show you now. We have Construction 2020. I'm not going to dwell too long on that, but Construction 2020 has a planning rationale in it which hopes to bring in 2 new planning bills, and it also hopes to basically stimulate construction vis-a-vis policies, NAMA, enforcement, regulation and various other simulations. The key thing is Planning Bill number 1. Planning Bill number 1 basically introduces 4 areas, which is Part 5, social affordable, is going to be changed. Vacant site levy, which the Minister mentioned, reduced planning contributions and modifications of duration of permission. The other items in Planning Bill number 2 is the planning regulator, which is a new planning person who will sit over all the planning system and basically oversee and guide it. It was supposed to have full powers, as recommended in the Mapping Tribunal, but in the new planning bill it's been washed down to basically a planning advisor post, so basically no real powers. The key item then is actually the Urban Regeneration Bill, which is basically taking Planning Bills 1 and bringing items into it. The Urban Regeneration Housing Bill is actually going through the Houses of Oireachtas this evening, I think at 3:40. It was scheduled to go through last Thursday. And in that it basically brings in items that hopes to stimulate housing construction in the Dublin area. The first key one is Part 5. As the Minister mentioned, the key thing in this is that all social housing has been reduced from 20% default position of your land to 10%, but it has to be social housing. There's no cash alternatives, so units have to be provided on the site. So now when you design a housing scheme, you're designing in your social housing units into it. There's an exemption for 9 units or less, so you're going to see a lot of applications, infill developments for 9 units or less, because they're basically going to be exempt from social affordable housing, social housing going forward. There's also part of the bill is reduced planning levies. The reduced planning levies will apply to houses that actually have been constructed but haven't been sold. So basically there was a whole dilemma there of whether we go back in, because there's, in all the Dublin County Councils, or City Councils, there's 3 planning contribution schemes in place. So it's very difficult to know where you actually come in. So this part of the bill will actually reduce these down and basically encourage construction and developments to actually go on site. The vacant site levy originally came from Jan O'Sullivan when she was in the Minister. It's basically saying we don't need to build on greenfield sites. We have enough brownfield sites in Dublin and around the country in our cities and towns, and that's where we should be building. That's where sustainability will be encouraged, because it's the towns that have the infrastructure, the services, the shops, the employment, and not the greenfield sites that are out on the edge with no roads, paths, links to transport. So it's a good initiative, it is a sustainable issue, but the vacant site levy, the way it's going to be applied, is 3% of the open market value of any site will be levied. But it's a complicated piece of legislation. It's currently in draft format at the moment, and I invite you to have a look at it. But it's not something I want to go through today for the audience, because it's complex. There's about 2 or 3 different stages for appealing the process. But it comes into effect in January 2017. So just to sum up the conclusions, are the new planning bills enough to basically stimulate the construction? My feeling is that there's something done, but it's not far enough. The one shoe fits all for development plan standards is wrong. Basically, we're applying the same housing standard to the rental market, to basically the social housing market, to the private market, and it's not sustainable. And there's kind of a push on from different organisations and bodies to basically create different standards for different types of the market for housing areas. Heights and density is a key issue as well. I think at Dublin City Council, the restriction of building to 6 stories can't be deemed to be sustainable. And then the time frame of a planning application, the 72 weeks, as Tom has mentioned before, that needs to be shortened down. There needs to be some way of decreasing the time length of when you go for a planning application and actually when you get your grant of construction. Finally, I just wanted to mention the resources into the planning system. They need to be increased as well. We're currently waiting sometimes up to 3 months to get a pre-planning meeting with the planning authority. It's no fault of their own. They're under-resourced. It's a key thing that you get in and have a pre-planning meeting to bring it to the next stage. So basically, the planning system is a complex web of intricacies, development plan standards, and now law. It's getting harder and harder. And what we do in our firm is we try to guide you through that by a multidisciplinary approach of both planning, architecture, and project management. I hope it improves. I think there's somewhat of an attempt made to basically stimulate the construction market. But again, I think planning is probably the most key part where it can be amended quickly and speed up the process of construction, because there's a time lag of about 18 months behind what we do and what actually happens in the ground. So hopefully we'll see in the future the new planning bills will create a reduction in uncertainty and bring construction back. But I do feel that we're at the cusp of a new construction wave. How far that carries is anyone's guess. But thank you for listening today.